I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
With Halloween approaching, it seemed only right to dedicate this video to one of the most beloved horror films of the last 20 years, Andres Muschietti's It Chapter 1. With Chapter 2 winding down in theaters, It Chapter 1 is back in the limelight as critics and fans weigh the two parts of the Stephen King adaptation, trying to decide which is better and if they collectively have earned the acclaim bestowed upon them. I am here to argue that while It Chapter 1 certainly has some quality moments that honor the legacy of Stephen King, the movie fails to be scary in the least. I'm Alex Mady, and welcome to the Unpopular Opinion. As much as I wanted to love Andres Muschietti's It, I found the movie to be lacking in many ways. Stephen King's resume is full of novels and movies that are both terrifying and eerily prescient, but it is the balance between horror and character development that has left him in an arena all his own. What It Chapter 1 lacks that made the 1990 television miniseries such an enduring cult classic is the subtle use of horror to accentuate the creeping menace that is Pennywise the dancing clown. While Tim Curry's performance was completely over the top, it was a malicious take on a character that could flip at any second into a monstrous nightmare.
I'll kill you all!
Nothing is subtle about the new version of It. I am beyond happy that the reception for the movie has aroused the curiosity of a new generation of fans to check out Stephen King's books, but that does not save this movie from being one of the most overrated films of all time. As a faithful fan of everything Stephen King has written, I derive no pleasure in saying this, and I actually did find some good things in It Chapter 1. On one hand, the non-supernatural scenes are absolutely stellar, with the entire cast doing one heck of a job. It is hard not to compare and contrast this cast with their counterparts in the 1990 miniseries, especially with the mannerisms and style of acting from Jonathan Brandis and Seth Green amongst others. At the time of release, It Chapter 1's cast was relatively unknown, but included Stranger Things' Finn Wolfhard and Midnight Special's Jaden Lieberher. They truly embody the characteristics that made Stephen King's creation so real and relatable. Even the updated 1980s setting works seamlessly. In fact, I'd put this young cast right alongside the ensembles of Stand By Me and The Goonies as one of the best ever in a youth-centered story. If it had been stripped of all horror and merely been a drama about these kids becoming friends, I would have watched that movie in a heartbeat. And this should be a reminder to Hollywood that there is still potential to make movies about kids with young actors who actually are the same age as those characters. It fails due to falling back on the lazy tropes of countless generic horror films. There are two types of horror that you can see on film. You have the jump scare type of horror that is executed with editing, music, and special effects.
Egg boy!
Then you have organic horror weaved into the fabric of the story. It relies far too heavily on the former and doesn't capitalize on numerous examples of the latter. Watching It Chapter 1, I continue to find myself unimpressed by what the filmmakers thought would be scary. Maybe it was Bill Skarsgård's over-the-top Pennywise, maybe it was the shoddy CGI used to enhance the visions the children see. There are some scenes, like the horrifying vision of burning hands reaching around a locked door, or the blood pouring from Beverly's sink, that work on their own. Then, there's the leper and the flute lady, both of which suffer from embarrassingly bad CGI. Practical effects would have been so much more effective to make these monsters seem tangible. Instead, I found myself laughing at just how poorly executed they both were. Then, there's Pennywise himself. Comparing Tim Curry's take on the role to Skarsgård has been equated to comparing Jack Nicholson's Joker to Heath Ledger's award-winning portrayal. The key difference here is that what Skarsgård does in no way eclipses Curry's take, nor does it really make the clown more frightening. Clowns are inherently scary, and even Ryan Murphy managed to make them far more terrifying on American Horror Story than Muschietti does here. Aside from the final confrontation with Pennywise in the sewer, the killing of Georgie, and the slide projector sequence, Pennywise is more humorous than horrifying through this entire film. He never really has much of an aura of menace rather than one of insanity. I'm not saying an insane clown is better than a menacing one, but it's definitely not the scarier of the two. Curry's portrayal hinted more at what Pennywise could do rather than showing us. This new version of the supernatural monstrosity is content to give us 10 times as many teeth as an example of how sharp they are when a single row of them still gets the message across. CGI is not and will never be as scary as practical effects. What Warner Brothers managed to do well with their marketing of It Chapter 1 was conceal all of the shoddy animated gore and focus on hinting at Pennywise's maniacal visage. That was a brilliant decision that kept butts in theaters to see what the fuss was all about. It Chapter 1 feels more like it's riding the coattails of Netflix's Stranger Things by evoking as much nostalgia from audiences as possible, which explains why this one is not set in 1957. But where Stranger Things thrived on giving us homages to the works of Steven Spielberg and King himself, Andres Muschietti's film does not benefit from a memorable score or enough nostalgia to carry it over the finish line. A lot more time should have been spent on developing something unique rather than hitting the same notes as every other horror film. Because, believe it or not, It Chapter 1 doesn't really present anything distinct from the countless other horror films released this year, aside from better acting, which in turn comes from a better screenplay. Cary Fukunaga's core script helped pave the way for Andres Muschietti's direction, but it's just not enough. It also suffers from being overlong, despite tackling only half of King's original novel. Focusing on the Losers Club as kids and leaving their adult years for the sequel was hailed as a bold and risky move. But by cutting the massive novel in half, there's no reason the film should have stretched to over 2 hours. After all of the build-up and bringing the kids together and forging a bond between them, the ending feels incredibly forced in such a short amount of time. I mean it when I said I truly did enjoy the interaction between the cast members, but the movie just doesn't earn the ending. By eliminating a decent explanation as to why everything floats and how Pennywise came to be, we're just left to assume that there's a rationale for this demonic jester to be killing children. It was much more clearly laid out and explained in the novel and the miniseries, whereas the feature film glosses over it in favor of presenting more gruesome sights that are really never needed. Basing your film on a novel that clocks in at 1,000 pages should have made it simple to not cut anything out. But making a word-for-word recreation of a book without trying to inject any originality, that's not the Hollywood way. It Chapter 1 takes extended time with some characters, especially Bill and Beverly, while others get short shrift like Mike and Ben. While seeing these middle schoolers stroll around Derry spouting F-bombs and acting like real teenagers is the best element of the story, that really is all they do. Even how Pennywise draws them together feels more tangential to the main story and forced into the narrative rather than being the driving force. I mentioned before that it lacks a compelling musical score, and I stand by that. While the eerie theme music has now become instantly recognizable, none of Benjamin Wallfish's other cues stand out as anything more than generic background music. Everything about this movie just feels bland, which is a disservice to the perfect casting of everyone on screen. Bill Skarsgård has since teased that he would be open to exploring more of Pennywise in a prequel film. Like Jason or Freddy Krueger, Pennywise is a character whose long legacy makes him ripe for any number of murder sprees, but like those slasher icons, this would diminish Pennywise's aura and turn him even further into an actual clown, not one who instills fear. When you focus too much on the villain, they turn into the star, and that is not what horror should be. So while I commend Skarsgård for making this character his own, his screen time should have been more visceral and intense. It is more infuriating than frightening, and that upsets me much more than I thought it would. After seeing this film numerous times, I still cannot figure out why anyone really was scared by it. I wanted so badly for this movie to keep me up at night or at least give me chills, but I found myself laughing at Skarsgård during his more over-the-top moments rather than cowering. I found more to fear from Henry Bowers and Alvin Marsh than I did from this child-eating monster. And that is the crux of where every Stephen King adaptation fails. They evoke the right mood and tone, but they never manage to stick the landing. There is so much potential in the first hour and a half of it that it collapses unto itself in the final act. It is only half of the story, so the inevitable Chapter 2 meant there would always be another chance to pull everything together. I'm a firm believer that if you plan to make a movie that is broken into several parts, each part has to stand on its own. It Chapter 1 does not stand on its own, and neither does Chapter 2. I hope the filmmakers follow through on the tease of recutting the story into a single film that mimics the source material. Maybe then it will work as a whole story, because right now, it just doesn't. But hey, that's just my unpopular opinion. Tell us yours in the comments below. I'm Alex Mady with JoBlo.com.